Racing in Upland is a big deal. Upland has a partnership with Stock Car Pro Racing in Brazil. You can design your own speedway meta-ventures and race around your Upland neighborhood or any streets in the Metaverse. We have cars, karts, and a lot more coming. But before all of this, and even before cars, we had the Upland Racing League. It was started by Dak, and in this episode, we had a great conversation about racing in Upland. As many players are waiting for Upland to provide utility and community, Dak took the bull by the horns and created the Upland Racing League. We spoke about the growth of the community and how he dealt with all the unknowns and the uncertainties around racing. Hope you enjoy this episode. So Dak, let's jump into this rapid fire questions so players can get to know you. When did you first join Upland?
September 2021.
And what is your home neighborhood in Upland?
Citadel in Kansas City.
Okay, great. Upland is known as play versus earn versus connect. When you started playing, how would you split that up out of 100? How much would you say is play? How much would you say was earn? And how much connect from your perspective?
30, 30, 40. So 30 earn, 30 play, 40 connect. And part of it is I was looking for play to earn games that were blockchain versus just throwing away money in premium games.
Okay. And when you look at yourself where you are today, how would you answer that same question? Play, earn, connect.
Connect is probably 60, 70%. Earn is probably 20%, and play is like 10%. I don't actually play a lot in Upland.
Interesting. That's quite the big shift. What was your last purchase in Upland?
Train station in San Francisco.
Oh, that's great. And obviously you are the founder of the Upland Racing League, so I think it's obvious to say that your favorite partnership is probably Stock Car Racing. Is that correct?
Yes, right now that's to me the most exciting one.
So putting that aside, because that's the obvious answer, what's your next favorite partnership that Upland has?
I'm going to go with Nowhere.
Nowhere, great for cafes. That's exciting. There's going to be a lot of great stuff coming out with that.
I want a racing cafe.
Racing cafe, great. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. We'll get there. So that finishes the rapid fire question period. And now let's get into it. So you said you started playing Upland about 2 years ago, and that you were kind of even in terms of play versus earn versus connect. And you've made quite a large shift more to the connect side. You've done a lot in that space. Did you come into Upland thinking about, hey, this is a great opportunity for me to become an entrepreneur and start something new? Or what were you thinking when you came into Upland?
What I was really thinking about was the fact that I was tired of putting money into freemium games. You know, all of the money that you throw into all of those mobile games where you get the passes and everything, and at the end of the day, you had nothing to show from it. And so I'm a collector. I collect magic cards, comic books, almost anything, right? And to me, they always had value, right? Because I owned them, and then, you know, as they got older and there was scarcity, they grew in value and so forth. And so I wanted something like that in the digital space, and so I started looking at blockchain-based games where you actually had NFTs that you could own. And I started with collectible card games on the blockchain. And through that, I ended up getting a commercial for Upland. I joined it. And so, and I like the idea of being able to own real estate that I owned and could then sell.
So I joined Upland also in 2021, and there wasn't even Spark when I joined. And you started the Upland Racing League. And you started that, I think, maybe the second after they announced that cars were going to be coming into the Metaverse. What's your connection with cars? What made you excited about that? And, you know, you weren't thinking about, or were you thinking about cars when you joined, or maybe you had this vision of what this metaverse could be, but this was something new and something that obviously appealed to you. And you're like, hey, this is something that I want to take and run with and create something a lot larger. So can you explain a little bit about the Upland Racing League and how you came to creating that and what your feelings were when you heard about that announcement?
Yeah. So I was working, and I still am working with the Upland Construction Company, and you know, we had really kind of looked at Spark management. We were talking about the whole idea of metafactoring, where you could use Spark to create and build things, and obviously car manufacturing was something that had been hinted on since like November 2021. And so I was really interested in the idea of like, well, how do we set up factories and then put our Spark contractors to work in those factories, providing and kind of delivering product. To this day, we still don't have that. But that led me to the idea of like, we want to be able to do manufacturing, or what we were calling metafacturing. And so when I heard about cars, I was interested in that. And then I was having conversations as part of the UDN with Martin and, some of the folks. And little by little, I started hearing about some of the things that were happening with cars. One, players and how much money they were setting aside for cars, to buy cars, to whatever it was. And not just UPIX, but USD. And so I'm like, okay, so there's opportunity there. Then second, as I was talking to the Upland team, they were, they mentioned, it was like a passing comment, right? Where they're like, oh, and the attributes for cars have already been written into the blockchain and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait, what? Because it was just like an offhand comment about like, wait, you mean you're saying you already have the stats and the mechanics for cars locked into the blockchain and so forth? It's like, yeah, no, we've been working on cars and they're much more further developed than I think people, than people may seem to think. And that was back in like February of 2022. So I'm like, okay. So I was talking to Elijah, to JR Wheels, to Mass Chef, and a couple of other people about cars and racing. And at the time, I had been watching the F1 series on Netflix. And so I really was like, oh, this is so cool. And then I'm like, can we do that in Upland? Why not? And so that, between the conversations with different folks and everything, and then just getting a couple of people to join this brand new server I created with like nothing in Upland. Cars weren't even out yet.
Yeah, it
There was
was
nothing
just an
about
idea.
racing.
It was
Yeah, it
kind
was
of
just an
a vision
idea.
and an idea, but you still couldn't even buy cars. We had no idea what they looked like. And you're going and starting an entire racing league.
Yeah. And the thing is, and if you go to the Upland Racing League now, you'll see one of the mission statements, or the value proposition I wrote for it back in March 2022, was that this will be a marketplace for all players interested in the racing economy as it affects Upland, right? Or I forget how I phrased it, but it was something like that. That it was really, the idea behind the Racing League was that it was a marketplace where people could come together. And it wasn't supposed to be the league. It was supposed to be sort of like a central league for other things to come in. And so we have like the Detroit Rally Racing League that comes into URL. We have the Ace Racing League that comes into URL. We have a lot of race commissioners that have their racetracks and are kind of doing their own racing in their own nodes and things like that. And for me, it was always supposed to be more like a hub where people could come together. And yes, there would also, obviously we also wanted to do our own racing. And from the very beginning, as I mentioned, Connect has always been my biggest element in Upland. It is. And so what I saw the difference between Upland Racing and URL Racing was that I wanted it to be community-based from the get-go, because I wasn't trying to build a racing game. I was trying to get people to race.
Right.
And so that's where community racing came from.
Well, when you don't have any ability to start racing, because there's no cars, there's no tracks, there's nothing, the only thing you can do is really create a buzz and create a community and bring people into your vision and what you're trying to create. Now, you talk about the racing economy, and if you zoom out a little bit more, there's the entire vehicle economy. And Upland
Mm-hmm.
has mentioned that it's not just going to be cars and land vehicles, there's going to be boats in the future. So there is this big economy and lots of things that go into it, which are obviously the racing tracks, those meta ventures. You have the block explorers, which are going to be your drivers, which you can train. Obviously, car manufacturing and car sales. Spark is also very tied in, because that's going to be your energy or your gasoline to power your vehicles. So I think we can expect to see some sort of charging station metaventure or something like that for people who don't
Yep.
have enough spark for their vehicles. And there's a number of other things as well that we can expect to see and learn about to create this entire economy. And there's a link in the upper right hand corner where I go into all the details about the expected car economy. So there is a lot going on with racing, which is starting, but it's still a very small piece of the entire vehicle and transportation economies. Can you talk a little bit about your experience? And obviously, you must be a very patient person if you're waiting, so long for a lot of these features to come in. But I feel there are a lot of people that are, learning from the Upland Guide and just involved in Upland, and they're saying, everything's moving so slowly. Why don't they have cars? Why can't I open up my Metaventure? Why don't they have this? And this doesn't work, and that doesn't work. So, can you tell us how you approach this whole thing? Because obviously, with the cars, it's very slow, and starting a community even before there's cars, you obviously have a certain relationship with the time and the development that Upland does. So please share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a philosophy for success in Upland, and I've talked about it in other places. I call it aggressive patience. So you got to be aggressive about getting into things, right? And that's where, I created the league before there was anything, right? And so I was aggressive about getting into the market. But then I had to be patient, right? Luckily, after I created the league, about a month later, I was talking to Jeremy, who's the product manager for racing in Upland, and then we had him in for a town hall where I got to ask him questions and see what was going on. And so he was able to kind of validate some of the assumptions we had, which made it easier to kind of move forward, right?
Right.
So it went from assumptions to
You need
speculation.
that validation a little bit when there's literally no information. You hope that your intuition is correct. But I think that if Jeremy was able to validate a lot of the things, which he obviously was, then that really gives you that confidence to move forward. And it says, okay, my vision does make sense. It does align with what Upland is thinking. I'm not some crazy person
Right.
here.
The other thing too that we did is that I focused on what we were able to do. So, and part of the idea of community racing came out of necessity. We couldn't race. We didn't have cars, right? We didn't know when it was going to come out, but what we did have was neighborhoods. We had nodes. We had players buying and building up areas in Upland. And so we started with standards for, what would be a URL sanctioned track, understanding that in the future, players would be able to create their own tracks. Right. And so now as players are getting their racetrack meta ventures, they're coming back into URL saying, hey, I got my racetrack approved. We're going to be able to go. And a lot of them, actually were putting in their in their submissions, we are URL sanctioned. Our standards for URL sanctioned track are much higher than Upland standards for a URL for a racing meta venture. But that's because we were focused on community and building and having a venue, not just having a racing game. And so that's the difference. And so from my perspective, it was one, having a bigger vision, two, picking up on the clues that are provided, right? There's a lot of clues. I also like to talk to a lot of different people. I listen to a lot of people like you, YK. I mean, what your video on the racing and the transportation and everything, I actually used that as kind of a validation for what I was doing with URL because you were so on target with some of the things that you said. And I was like, man, this guy really knows his stuff. And
Thank you.
so, oh, no, you're welcome. And so, but that's the key is that you have to gather information, but you can't wait to take action until everything is there because if you do, someone else is already doing it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Now, when people were starting with you and you created guidelines for, what has to be obviously the length of the track, and you also have how many properties you need to own and how many people need to own the properties there that are involved. And then Upland comes out with, compared to your standards, maybe something that's either a lot less or different in terms of the length of the track. How do you
Mm-hmm.
approach that when you have, you have one plan and everyone's trying to develop to that, and then all of a sudden, wait, it's not A, it's B. How do you deal with these kinds of things, with Upland always coming up with, new sizes of factories or new models or new rules or changing the rules of treasure hunting or things? How do you deal with all these changes, especially when you're trying to, not just as one person, but you're trying to build something, you're trying to standardize things, you're trying to create a community, and the goalposts change. How do you approach that? Because I think a lot of people they really have a difficult time with that, with
Yeah.
everything that Upland's doing.
Yeah. And I guess that's one of the advantages I have. And it goes to, I guess, aggressive patience, right? Because I see this as we are alpha, right? We are beta, and everything changes. And if you cannot adapt and change, then you're going to get buried, right? And that's one of the things that I think has always been kind of my key element to it. I'm a big Jim Collins fan, and for a lot of people who may not know who Jim Collins is, he writes a lot of really good business books, Good to Great, Built to Last, things like that, right? And one of the things that I always liked about him was the examples he had about the hedgehog principle and the flywheel, right? So he uses 3M as one of the examples, but the idea is have a very strong core of what you want to achieve, but don't define it so much that you limit yourself to what you're able to accomplish, right?
Makes
And
sense.
then and then the flywheel is use little things to keep getting it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it's just perpetual motion and going on its own kind of thing, right? And so like with UCC, we do contract spark management, right? It's not a spark exchange. So when spark exchanges came out and when the spark market bottomed out and everything, everybody's like, oh, UCC, you won't be able to do anything. Well, I'm like, but that's not our market. That's not our business model. Yeah, we're having a hard time, but we also diversified because we saw the writing on the wall, right? With URL, it's a marketplace. It's not just a racing league, right? It's not just a track. It's a venue, right? And so those are the kinds of things where you create something in a way that it's bigger than itself so that as the parts come into place, that the sum of the parts is greater, the sum of the parts, I forget how it goes, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
The idea being is you want to make sure that you can take anything that happens and still find a way to spin it and make it a positive. As people joke about Microsoft, it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know, same thing. How do you turn that bug into a feature?
Right. For me, I teach people that they really need to understand the entire metaverse. It's not just enough to, if you want to be a small player and enjoy yourself and do what you want to do, that's great. But if you do look at this seriously as a platform and an opportunity to become an entrepreneur or even make money, you really have to understand the entire ecosystem. And it goes beyond just the properties and it goes beyond racing and the entire car economy that I spoke about. You have to have some sort of a vision. You have to align your vision with Upland's vision and kind of understand what they're trying to create in the long term and be able to make changes on the fly
Adjust.
in the
Yep.
short term. So you do really have to have two different strategies, but always making sure that you have this long-term strategy and you're saying, what am I doing today that can help me move forward in the short term, but that if everything changes, I'm not going to completely lose everything I have or everything's going to be devalued. I think diversifying in the metaverse just with everything in real life is also very important. If you put all your eggs in one basket and something happens, then something happens.
Yeah. And diversifying doesn't mean just in your approach to your strategy. I think it also means in your approach to team building and engagement. Like I would not be where I am if it wasn't for Mass Chef. He's operations. He takes care of the servers. He's the one that knows how to get the details done. I'm not a detail person. I'm more of a vision person, right? And so him and I, our dichotomies, our yin and yang, end up creating a whole that works much better. And so I think that as players, finding someone that you can work with. I mean, if you look at Samurai Aquatics, the Ben, More Cheese, and DTEC, right? The way they work together. If you look at Tosshead and Shacklin, right? The way they work together. Like there's enough examples in Upland of teams, and the teams tend to be a lot more successful than the individuals.
Yeah, well, at the moment, I'm still an individual, and just the amount of work that I put in, or anyone really puts into creating something around the Upland Metaverse, there's a lot to do. So
Hmm.
having a co-founder or another person, or even a small team, is absolutely advantageous, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So
Yeah.
you come into Upland and saying, okay, this is a pretty cool concept. I can own my own property, and then you learn about this entire world and entire ecosystem, and there's just so much that's already going on. But we're still extremely early. So in the future, when we have huge economies and it's going to be completely impossible for any one person to really have a full understanding of the entire Upland global real estate market or even all of the racing going on in Upland. It's going to be nearly impossible to do that. So
Yeah.
people are going to have to start really choosing a location, finding a neighborhood and that racetrack and community that they want to be a part of. And that's where all the value is going to be. So there's always going to be people who are going to be traveling from one place to another, whether it be for an event or a specific race because of a competition that you guys are having that might be cross country or whatnot. But
Hmm.
people are going to be around their home neighborhood, and all of the services and all of the things that they're going to want to do are going to be there for them.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to be really interesting as right now because of the logistics of how movement works, it's very open and people just go everywhere. But as the logistics for movement, as the logistics for transportation and all of that starts to come back into Upland and it becomes a little more real in that regard, you're going to see the world shrink a bit. Not as much as the real world, but it's
Right.
still, I think, going to shrink a bit.
Yeah, I mentioned that Spark is going to be the resource to power your cars. So now all of a sudden, when you have a car and you're going to want to drive from the north end of the city to the south end of the city, and it's going to take a number of Spark hours, then all of a sudden you have to decide, well, do I want to finish the construction of this additional house, or do I want to save the Spark in order to power my car? So it might be now that a lot of people are still questioning what they're doing with all their spark. Okay, I built my home and I built another home and another one. I might not be interested in manufacturing, so I continue to build homes, but I'm only one person. What do I need all this spark for? And I don't think that it's really come into play, and Upland hasn't been talking about it enough. But this is going to be a huge game changer once they do start announcing that all of a sudden now you need spark in order to power your cars. You're going to have Ubers, taxis, transportation of goods and all that stuff. And that's going to open things up, and that's going to be, I think, the next game changer for Upland.
Well, and little by little, I think people are going to start noticing that. Like, so for example, I think one, finding spark and treasure hunting is getting harder. Two, not as much spark is being reached, right? And then three, the requirement of 5 spark on a meta venture, I think it's also going to start changing the
On a
dynamics of
factory,
how people
for
on
a
a factory,
factory.
right? Yeah, I think that's going to start changing the dynamics of who buys Spark and where that Spark gets used. And then if you want to build and everything, how does that get built? Because if you need your Spark for your factory, but you still need to build a showroom to sell your items, who's going to build that showroom,
Right.
right? And that's where I think, managed construction services, I think, will still play a part because people will still want to build. If someone has a track and they want to build out a lot of fun, buildings on it and so forth, doing it yourself in the Spark Exchange can be a bit annoying, right?
It's a
So
project.
having
There's
some managed,
a lot
yeah,
of
exactly,
logistics behind that. You can talk more about that, I'm sure, but it's just a huge undertaking, and that's assuming you even
yeah,
own all of those properties or are have a group of people that own the majority of it. But it's a really
yeah.
huge undertaking.
And then even transportation. I mean, Ben 68, he's talked about it a lot, where he can't wait for transportation logistics to come in because he's getting tired of moving crates around. It takes a lot of time to
Yeah,
move crates around, right? And it'd be easier if someone could just come in, load it up into a truck, and move it for him, so that
yeah,
he doesn't have to spend the time doing it. So it's going to be that thing again, right? The three-legged stool: time, cost, and quality.
that's right.
Right?
That's right.
Do you want it done fast? Do you want it done well? Do you want it done cheap?
Yep. All right. Well, any last things that you want to mention? We're coming up to the end of time. This has been a lot of fun talking to you, a lot of great insight. Any last words about where people can find the UCC and the Upland Racing League?
So we have Discord servers, and we'll give the links and put them into the description. And we're also racing on Fridays, 1700 UTC. And you can find us on YouTube and Twitch for our live streaming. On top of that, we will also be telecasting in the Real Node LA Theater with Elijah and team there. So they are they're simulcasting our live event during race weeks.
Great. Thank you so much, Dak, for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you in the Metaverse.
Thank you. Appreciate it.